Hello and welcome to Alternatives, the Access program that provides a venue for talented individuals to explore interesting topics or showcase their artistic endeavors. I'm Al DiGiacomo and we're back at the Kerygma Gallery in Ridgewood, New Jersey. And today we're bringing you the second of our two-part series on encaustic art with our featured guest, Dale Roberts. This is an old and fascinating technique that has been used for over 2,000 years, and one of the earliest applications of encaustic paints dates back to the ancient Egyptians. Dale is going to share his knowledge and artistic abilities with us, so let's continue. Dale, it's great to be back on show number 2 here.
Well, thank you very much, Al.
What will we be seeing in the second part of our series?
Well, the first part, I put paint down on a panel and reacting to a setup that I had put together earlier. And the second part of the series, you're going to see very shortly the burn-in process. You'll see me make this flat horizontal, and I'll pick up an implement over here, plug it in, and pass it over the surface of this painting. And what I'm doing when I bring that over and heat this up is I'm actually melting and fusing these layers together. The paint will take on a completely different characteristic when I do that. Now, if I were to hold it in one position too long, I would absolutely lose any fidelity to an image that I have here.
Will it all become liquid and the blues will fuse with the reds and the greens? Is that what will happen?
It could do that. What you'll see when I'm doing it is I'll use a circular motion, and I'm paying close attention to where I've just heated and how hot this area is compared to what's next to it. I've lost a good number of paintings in the training stages to heating that too much and letting it just run together. So it's a process. It's a very scary moment, actually.
I think what we should do is the viewers of our second show here, we should bring them up to speed of what entails in the encaustic process, Dale.
Well, the encaustic process we discussed a little bit earlier does go back to the ancient Egyptians, and it involves hot beeswax and dry pigment, and that is your paint. It's basically a molten substance that you apply and you heat, and that's it. Very simple. However, as you can see over here, very involved when it comes to how to actually apply it and make it happen.
Now, what really caught the Egyptians' attention to the, was it the permanence?
I think in my research, I've read a good bit about it, and it does seem that the permanence was an issue. They were quite, as you know, interested in the notion of an afterlife, and they often surrounded the deceased with implements of their life, preparing them for the way to come. And the encaustic portrait paintings that I was exposed to at the Metropolitan Museum were actually portraits of the folks who had deceased. Now, it's interesting because they didn't choose to paint them the way they appeared when they passed on. They chose to paint them in the prime of life. So if a person, died when they were fairly old, you saw this fairly young-looking portrait. And I believe that permanence appealed to them as a way of just putting the instrument of paint onto a surface and allowing it to last, throughout the eons.
Did they use this to decorate insides of tombs and pyramids and sarcophagus?
Yeah, there was some of that. And not a lot of that has come down to us. I'm afraid there's been so much looting and taking away that some of the physical things have actually escaped our notice. But on the sarcophagus, you did often get these little funerary masks that were done, and they was then taken off and displayed at the Met. So you got a chance to see these things that were relics done 2,000 years ago put up on the wall. And they look like they were just done today.
How about the Greeks? Did they follow the?
They did, and to some extent they used to use it for mural painting and wall painting. And they also would often polychrome their sculptures, meaning they would put color and paint on the sculptures themselves. So we're used to seeing these bronze or marble sculptures that are the color of the intrinsic material, but often they were completely fully colored, and they would use beeswax and pigment to do it.
That's interesting.
Right now what I'm doing is I'm applying this paint with a palette knife. You can apply it any way you can get it onto the panel. And this particular object I'm concentrating on so that you can see the burn-in process. And just for fun, I'm going to take and pick another kind of color up and kind of swash it on here with a paper towel so that you can see there are other ways to apply paint to the surface. Any way that you can think of to get it on there is quite acceptable. And in the meantime, I happen to be cleaning my palette while I'm doing it. In this case, this multicolor that I'm applying is functioning as a space that will push the top lip of that particular object back. And I'm going to be, right now, turning this to a horizontal position.
So the painting is just about ready to go into the
the burn-in.
The burn-in.
Okay. There we go. Loosen this side up.
Dale, you're originally from upstate New York, and you've learned a lot of handy skills growing up, working on farms and things.
Absolutely.
And your work kind of encompasses your entire family. I'd like the people at home to get a kind of a feel for how you're handy with this type of processes. And
Yeah, you know, I think that's a key part to who I am as a painter. I have a wonderful support system that works around me. I have my wife that helps leaf frames when I do leafing, like this one here. My father-in-law makes my frames, and the wood that we get to make the frames we actually get from upstate New York, where I'm from, and my father's property. And we've actually gone so far as to go to a sawmill and bring sections of trees and have them cut to specification and bringing them home. Part of the reason for that is economic. You can certainly do a little better price-wise when you do it that way.
Sure.
But also you have a bit of a control over the product as well. And I find it fascinating to get to learn about people's vocations as they help you along the way.
Now this looks like a little handmade tool that you're using here, Dale.
Good observation, Al. It's actually my father-in-law and I engineered this. This is a hot plate from an old coffee maker, and to melt the paint in, you have to pass it over the surface and heat the surface of this paint up over 212 degrees. And it necessitates holding on to it from a distance, so we kind of constructed this little heating
Right,
tool.
too close is may burn or kind of heat the paint, the wax up too quickly.
Yeah, and in fact, before I did this, I actually used to use gloves and a piece of asbestos or whatever I could find to allow me to hold on. Now, as you start to see here,
Oh, I can see it starting to
paint?
shine up there,
Starting
yeah.
to shine and starting to move as it goes. Now, at this point, you start
Oh,
to see
the
interactions
texture
of the color.
is incredible. Is it looking good up there? That's wonderful down here.
And this section, or this particular phase of the working process, is what makes this true encaustic as opposed to simply painting with wax. This is actually called the intusion, or burning in and fusing of the paint layers. You need to do this periodically throughout the construction of the painting, and when you're completely done, you do it over the entire surface, just to fuse the paint layers together. And you can see different colors act differently when the heat is applied to them.
Oh, that is marvelous, Dale.
That was one of the things that attracted me to the process. It's different in its look from any other kind of paint.
Is that what really compels you to work in the encaustic method?
That, along with the debt to painters past, because of the nature of this medium and its high degree of permanence, I was very interested in the fact that these things that I made wouldn't alter over time. Was schooled in traditional media, oil and egg tempera, and I found egg tempera to be another wonderful possibility along that way. But this just seemed to appeal to my nature and a sort of play and unpredictability that can happen. And even as I do this now, I'm starting to see things in the paint.
Is that the heat that is bringing up the reds and those deep blues, Dale?
Mm-hmm.
That's incredible.
In fact, I have layers of other colors underneath this blue vase, and as I heat them, the underlayers start to work their way to the surface. And different colors and pigments will heat at different temperatures, slightly different levels, so you'll get this interaction that you can't quite predict. You get a wonderful softness starting to happen over here.
Smooth air, yeah. Now these are the concepts and the approaches that you blend into your own style here?
Yeah, it has been very much an organic outgrowth of process that has formed what I'm doing in my work, and it's a marriage between the two things, where I'm experimenting with technique and looking at subject, thinking about theme and emphasis that helps me to come up with something that's unusual and hopefully compelling. I should mention in the Department of Support System that I have 2 young sons, and there's no end to the support that my family provides in getting a quiet space for me to do the work.
Now you defined your work as that you're currently engaged in as a continued refinement of visual dialogue with life. Would you care to elaborate on that philosophical look at Encaustic?
Yeah, because it's a method that won't be tamed. It sort of causes you to think differently every time you approach a subject. You can't just say, this is how you paint X, Y, Z. You can't say, well, I'll get out this particular thing and approach it this way. In fact, what it involves is a dialogue where I'm thinking about the application of the paint and how it might turn out, and then reacting to it as it does, and thinking about my subject and the impression that I want to give to the viewer. And all along the way, there's this back and forth that happens. This speaks to me, in a sense. The subject speaks to me, or I wouldn't have been drawn to it in the first place. And I hopefully will get that message across to folks that look at the work. You can get some wonderful textures with Encaustic in a fairly short time, which is one of the things that does appeal to me. When you look at the setup over here, you can see that it's not something that lends itself to plein air painting, let's say. You're not going to strap this on your back, go out to your favorite area and begin.
Yeah.
In the historical end, something of note, I was really quite blown away when I went to the Metropolitan Museum and saw the Fayum portraits because of their freshness. The color looked as though it had just been applied, and there's a kind of life to the paint that I found very fascinating as well. And when it comes to commemorating the deceased, I've told you before that they often would, bury folks with attributes of their life. Painters would be buried with their implements, and in the Egyptian times they were called kutera, and they had to do with whatever methods it took for them to heat up their paint and put the paint on and scrape it away. So you'll find tombs of painters that are surrounded with their makings of painting.
Now you have described some of the great masters, Leonardo da Vinci, who had dabbled in Encaustic.
Yeah. In Leonardo's case, he was a very restless kind of mind, as I think we're pretty well aware, and he was always looking for ways to work differently. He was also a little impetuous when it came to working with Encaustic. It seems he didn't research the ground that was required, and sometimes painted on things that would get moisture from the rear, and the paintings would not survive. I think Leonardo is fondly remembered for his restless mind and those few things that he did hand down to us.
Do you ever stop in the process here, work with some of the tools to scrape and put texture into it, and then go back on, rework it, and it's just like constant back and forth until you're satisfied communicating with your work?
Yeah, and I think that's a great term. I do feel that I'm communicating with it, because this says something to me as I work with it, and right now I'm using a palette knife to soften an edge. I'll look at this and say, you know, I'd like to lose a little bit of this area, which will in turn make another area present itself more clearly. So yeah, I will use various materials and move on to other areas. Razor blades are key to what I'm doing, and actually right now is a good time. I can show you with this razor blade what can happen if I scrape into the surface. You'll lose a little bit of what's under it. I'm not sure how much of this will pick up, but you can bring down the surface to things that are underneath it and get some interesting textures that way as well.
All of a sudden the lighter shades have been sharpened right up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, what's underneath becomes exposed, and the painting becomes a kind of a history in itself as well. So we spent some time talking about the historical aspect of this, but the paintings themselves have a kind of history that I find very appealing as I'm working on them. And another positive thing about this medium, as I extol its virtues, is that you can come back to this any time. I could paint on this and put it aside for 15 years, and then heat things up again, heat up the panel a little bit, I'm ready to go. Because this surface is inert. There's no drying or losing of oil or chemical change that's going on, so it's technically very sound for me to do that, which is an interesting quality the paint has. Now I've taken paintings in my early years working with encaustic that weren't quite coming together, or that I had thought were finished, and I've actually taken this little heat element and melted down vast sections, scraped away, removed things, and then worked back into it, and it'll be a seamless result if you're able to pull it off. So.
Now, in preparation, you and I were talking about some of the modern artists that have experimented with encaustic, and you mentioned Jasper Johns.
Yeah, his Flag series, a very, very famous, well-known series that he had done, he experimented with encaustic. And in Jasper Johns' case, he painted on canvas, which is something that is difficult to do. You have to support it well enough to make that work. But Jasper Johns was interested in introducing collage elements into his painting. And so he would actually lay newspaper and other kinds of paper down into the surface and then put clear wax over it, or lightly tinted wax, and then allow that to set in there. I'm not positive that he had done a burn-in process. I don't think that the collage elements would have allowed for it. However, there is a definite quality when you look at those paintings of peering through a film and seeing something and having light come back to you. There's a bit of a revival today of encaustic painting. It lends itself to a more abstract approach often. This little panel I had done here, I just put some color down and put other colors on top and heated it, and you get unpredictable results. You can do anything from that to the most realistic painting. However, to get a realistic result demands a lot of patience and control. Often you invent techniques as you go, and you decide what will work and what won't.
Again, a question that I brought up in the first series here. If you were to use other textures, if you were to add sand or something before it's set in, or maybe a tube oil paint or some other things, would it really be considered an encaustic?
Well, it depends on which of those things you do add. If you were to add sand, sand generally is inert, and it's a silica and it's a microcrystalline structure, which is pretty close to what's going on with this actual paint. So in that case, I would say yes. However, if you add a kind of paint which doesn't allow for the burn-in, if you're adding tube oil paints to the extent that it's mostly oil paint with just a little wax or Dorland's medium, which they add to it often, then it's not true encaustic. It has to have that burn-in stage at the end to actually warrant that term.
If someone was experimenting on their own, there's many artists who experiment on their own, would there be any harmful effects in heating up, say, oil or acrylic paint with the type of heat that you use and standing underneath that substrate?
Yeah, I think that certain pigments for sure can be a little bit toxic. And whenever I mix my paints, I have a hood at home that ventilates to take those away. When you heat oil paint, you can run into some difficulties depending on the chemical composition of the particular pigment. It's fun when you're working with this method to see just how quickly you can build up a fairly robust and tactile image. And that is, again, one of its prime attractive qualities to me. I often feel like I'm sort of forced to stick up for it because it's so involved and there's so much technical end to it. However, I think when folks try it or see it, that they can see that there's definitely some things that are intrinsic to this that you can't get otherwise.
In using this technique, which seems to me to be a combination between abstract and realism, would this piece that you're working on lend itself to a lot more of the technique of the scraping and the etchings into it?
Yeah.
I mean, we're about 5 minutes to the end of our second program here.
Mm-hmm.
As a finished product, where do you see this piece coming out to be? More of a scraper, or more of a fusing process, or?
Well, at this point, it seems to be lending itself to the fusing process. And whenever I'm looking at a subject, I often think about the way we focus on things. Mm-hmm. And that's part of that dialogue with life. And I'm thinking of the way our eyes move, they dart about, they grab onto something that has their attention. And so I might get in here now with a razor blade and pick out an edge or a section of something and then allow it to merge back into the field in order to create volume and space. So each painting has its own kind of identity. If I wanted to, I could take a lot of what's on my palette and sort of shovel it onto this with a big wide palette knife. That would obliterate things and it would make it all of a sudden very atmospheric. So there's all sorts of ways I can go with this as I develop it.
Now you also said that one thing that you have to do with encaustic art is you have to rub it.
Yeah.
Can you kind of tell us a bit on the proper way to rub it encaustic?
Absolutely. When you finish the painting and you've got it to the point where you are totally done manipulating it and heating it, and it's cooled, I often wait till it's framed. You then take a soft cotton cloth and you make a pad out of it. And these are some images around here that have been finished over time. And you will take this cloth, and if I can, I'll come over at this one, and you'll actually, in a circular motion, push and rub on the painting. Now this particular kind of paint invites you to touch it because it's very tactile, it's got a sense of softness and malleability about it. But when you do this, you actually clear up a sort of haze that can happen with changes in humidity. And you're also strengthening and hardening the microcrystalline structure of the paint.
The oxidation and dust and things like that, the environment?
Yeah. Now cleaning a painting like this is wonderful because this is how you do it. When you clean an oil paint, you need to talk to a conservator, restorer.
A professional.
With this, a professional. With this, you get your dust rag out and you fold it up in circular motion. And it's not only clean, but it brings up that wax luster.
Well, in our last few moments here, Dale, is there anything that you would like to add for our viewers at home?
Yeah, I thank you for the opportunity and the chance to share this method of painting. It's ancient. It's something that did demand a fair amount of practice to get to a point where I could work with it. It may seem a little easy to work with as I'm doing it, but my advice is to just grab hold of it. If it's something that appeals to you, you think it might have some interest, try it, and try it again and again. There's no substitute for that sort of Yankee ingenuity and being able to stick to something. If you do stick to a passion, you'd be amazed at what can result.
Well, Dale, thank you so much here. It's been a wonderful experience just watching the whole thing transpire right before our very eyes. Again, Dale, thank you for sharing your talent and enlightening us on this most fascinating topic known as encaustic art. I would like to thank Ron and Vi Hughes, owners of the Kerygma Gallery, for allowing us to make this show possible. Ron and Vi remind us that outstanding talent can be found in a gallery near you. So enjoy life, explore art, and for those who would like to contact us or comment on our programs, can find it at oktv.org. So that's all the time we have for you now. For OKTV, I'm Al DiGiacomo. May I?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you.